All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. The stage is set for the high-stakes G20 summit. The leaders of the world's 20 big economies are at the venue of the G20 meeting in Rome for the welcome ceremony. Now, the first session of the G20 summit will, of course, begin in about an hour's time from now. And these are the dignitaries who are streaming in at the welcome venue. And the gentleman that you're looking at on your screens is the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who's being welcomed at the G20 summit. The special focus, of course, this time round will be on climate change, on building the economy back better after the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the very contentious issue of how the richer nations need to do more in combating climate change. And we are now getting these live visuals of the Canadian Prime Minister, who has recently again been re-elected with a pretty decent mandate, and he also is being welcomed at the summit venue, the G20 summit. This is a gathering of 20 top economies of the world. The 20 most influential nations are presently going to be putting their heads together to try and come up with some kind of a consensus for a way forward, to try and chalk out a strategy, some kind of a policy that everyone can in fact work on. Because remember, climate crisis, although most nations agree that this is of course a serious emergency, not everyone agrees on how to combat climate change. The richer nations want the poorer nations to give up on what are described as non-green technologies, but they do not want to open their purse strings to help the poorer nations to adapt to greener but more expensive technologies that would keep carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. This, of course, is the venue in Rome, and the leaders of the top 20 nations are already here. And earlier this morning, we also saw the Indian Prime Minister, before the G20 summit were to begin. He also had a very fruitful engagement with the Pope at the Vatican. And we saw the American president, who also has been at the venue a day in advance, and yesterday he met with the Pope. And this of course is a crucial gathering of the world leaders. And my colleague Siddhant Sibal is presently in Rome. He's been tracking the developments very closely for us. Siddhant, if I can bring you in on this, the leaders are arriving at the venue. This is a crucial summit of the G20. Climate crisis is going to be the focus on the agenda, but can all of these leaders agree on some kind of a consensus to try and combat climate change?
Well, it is the consensus word that everyone is hoping for at the G20 summit, that the G20 countries are able to achieve a consensus on global issues from climate change to COVID crisis, the twin disasters the world is facing. But largely, we know that before the leaders' meeting, there has been literally the burning of the midnight oil by officials, by the Sherpas of these countries, including, of course,
all right, Siddhant, if I can interrupt you there. We are getting visuals of the Indian Prime Minister, who's now making his way to the venue. He's just arrived at the venue where the G20 summit will be held. This is India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He, of course, will be taking part in the G20 summit. And he, of course, has got a very clear message for the world that the time to act on climate change is now. And there is no other time that we can waste in terms of combating climate change. And he said that what is needed for the world leaders to cooperate and to pull together in one direction, so that the different nations who are pursuing different strategies in their own growth stories can all be on the same page when it comes to ensuring that growth is not hampered, that the countries continue to develop in the manner that they can, but at the same time the climate of planet Earth is not impacted negatively. Prime Minister Narendra Modi stepping in at the G20 summit, a very crucial meeting for the Indian Prime Minister. And there we see the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. She also is making her way at the G20 summit. So the leaders from top 20 nations are at the venue. They are in Rome in Italy. And this, of course, is a very crucial summit of the top 20 nations. Remember, this is also a summit that is happening just a couple of days before the COP26 summit that will be held in Glasgow in Scotland from the 1st of November. All right, my colleague Siddhant Sibil is still with us. Siddhant, if I can bring you in on this. So a lot is on the agenda, a lot of talking will be done, but will there be consensus? That is what we were talking about.
Well, yes, of course, a lot of talks which are expected to happen at the 16th G20 summit, but largely it is the consensus formation that is something that everyone will be keenly awaiting for. We also know that India has given a proposal for the mutual recognition of COVID vaccine certificate. India, in fact, has given a proposal outside of G20 as well to countries where there are large Indian diaspora. So largely, of course, the officials are burning the midnight oil before the final communique can be released. But since this meeting is coming just before the climate meeting, the climate summit, it is crucial in a sense that this could be a stepping stone for the wider consensus formation over the climate issue. That has seen a lot of divisive issues in terms of, first, of course, is the climate financing by the developed world to the developing countries. India, as we have been talking about, will be focusing on what it has been doing, whether it is the International Solar Alliance, whether it is the issue of renewables. India has made major commitments when it comes to renewable energy. That remains the top priority for New Delhi. But, of course, there have been growing calls for zero emission target by New Delhi. But New Delhi has been highlighting that how while developed countries have already achieved their growth, and now of course they are calling on developing countries, there should be a differentiated responsibility when it comes to dealing with the issue of climate change. And India will be talking about two other key issues that have been traditionally India's key talking points. One is the issue of terrorism. Cross-border terrorism has been a big worry, especially in South Asia. And another is the issue of black money. This is the Indian Prime Minister's 8th G20 summit in which he is participating. The first was 2014, the Brisbane, Australia G20 summit. There he gave the proposal to fight the issue of black money. And since then, it has really been the talking point at the summit. Largely, if we understand the governance system of G20, does not have any permanent secretariat. So whatever the hosts decide in consultation with other G20 countries, it is taken up as the agenda. So when India hosts the G20 summit in the year 2023, do expect these issues dominating the global conversation, especially when the meeting happens. There is a convention center being prepared at the heart of Delhi in Pragati Maidan.
Absolutely, indeed. Do continue to stay on with the Siddhant. These are visuals that we are getting from the venue where the G20 summit will be held. What you're looking at on the screens is the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison being welcomed at the venue just a little while back. We also saw the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi making his way to the venue. So was Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and this is Ursula von der Leyen, one of the top chiefs of the European Union. She also is being welcomed at the venue. We also saw Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who also made his way to the venue just a little while back. Remember, these are the top 20 nations, and what is interesting is that these nations collectively account for nearly about more than 85% of the world's GDP. They also account for nearly about 80% of the international trade, and they account for 2/3 of the world's population and roughly half of the world's land area. Now, the G20 was founded way back in 1999 in response to a severe world economic crisis, and since the year 2008, the group has convened at least once every year. And now we're looking at Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Britain, being welcomed at the venue. So all of these leaders are, of course, gathering. They will be doing a lot of talking. There will be a lot of bilaterals that will also be held. We expect the Indian Prime Minister to hold a bilateral with the French President and also with the Indonesian President later this evening. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was the person that we were looking at on the screen. So the dignitaries are making their way to the venue. This, remember, is a very crucial sort of a moment for the different leaders of the world in framing and forging a policy that is workable, a framework that everyone can adhere to, and also for the richer nations to in fact put forth a slight hesitation that they have in terms of opening up their purse strings, because every nation, developed as well as developing, will have to pull in the same direction to make any meaningful change for climate change. And also, Siddhant, we earlier saw a few of these leaders where, this is going to be a moment where all of these leaders are present at this point of time in Rome, and they'll be looking at how to frame the agenda going forward for climate change. And the G20 summit is happening just before the COP26 summit that will be held in Glasgow from the 1st of November. So there is a lot of time, and there are a lot of frameworks under which these different world leaders are coming together. But the same question that still remains, can all of them come up with some kind of a framework that will be workable?
Well, if we understand the problems at multilateral forums, is the bigger the organization, the difficult it is when it comes to dealing with a diverse set of countries with diverse set of interests to come together at a meeting point and form a consensus. Now, groupings like SCO, like BRICS, they are of a different shade in terms of a smaller grouping, shade by sometimes economics, sometimes geography. Now, the problem with G20 is that this is a very large grouping, 20 of the large economies of the world having different political system coming together. So there will be issues, but the fact that 20 economies, when they speak in one voice, as they spoke after the 2008 financial crisis, there is a strong message. This grouping basically works on interpersonal relationship of leaders. The leaders are kept in a room. They decide, they talk frankly, they converse, and they come out with conversations. So 20 people, 20 world leaders in a room talking frankly and coming out with consensus. And this consensus is taken back home, formed into laws, legislated, and percolates down from the echelons of power to the last man standing, whether it's the person in New Delhi or New York, or whether the person is here at the Vatican. It impacts everyone. So there is a certain kind of division, but it is leadership is all about making sure that people are able to bridge the division or something that is not achievable. But in the past, G20 has done miracles. This is a grouping. This is a product of crisis, the crisis of 2008, the financial crisis that, of course, change the world forever, and COVID crisis provides that same opportunity as well in terms of making sure that world can come together to resolve the problems. The problem is that this time, while leaders are meeting, there are certain big leaders who are present virtually. The Chinese president, he hasn't gone out to any meeting since almost 2 years now. His last visit was to Myanmar, and then of course COVID crisis swept across the world, and he hasn't traveled, and he is missing here. The Russian president Vladimir Putin is not present here. He is busy because of the COVID crisis, the number increasing in Russia. The Japanese Prime Minister is busy with the elections. The South African president is busy with elections. So there are leaders who are missing. Traditionally, G20 has been site of a lot of meetings. One meeting that has been a permanent fixture for the Indian Prime Minister's agenda is the BRICS meeting. This is not happening because 3 of the BRICS leaders, South Africa, China and Russia, are not present. RIC and JAI. RIC is Russia, India, China, and JAI is Japan, America and India. These are 2 trilaterals which have been meeting on the sidelines of G20. This is not happening this time. So focus largely is on the bilateral relationship, on the bilateral meetings of the Indian Prime Minister with many European leaders. He's meeting the French President Emmanuel Macron, and India-France relationship is something that is completely transformed in terms of best relationship between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the French President Emmanuel Macron. This is the first in-person meeting, but that doesn't mean they haven't interacted, just just last month, they had a telephonic conversation after the AUKUS pact. There is an AUKUS shadow on the West, given that the Europeans feel betrayed by what the Americans have done, chalked out a deal with the Australians along with the Brits, and kept France kept France in the lurch. So it is all about bridging that gap as well. We know that US President Joe Biden had visited the French embassy here and made sure that things are all back to normal.
All right, Siddhant, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Rome and getting us all these updates. But this, of course, is the very crucial aspect of this G20 summit. Remember, the leaders from the top 20 economies from around the world, they've gathered there. But the question, of course, is the criticism that's also leveled against G20. Is it just a talking shop? Is it a place where all of these high-profile leaders come, they talk, and then they go back to their respective nations, and very little headway is in fact made in framing policies that everyone can come forth on? Because remember, the Brazilian president, he also is going to be present. He's made some very specific demands for the world leaders. He said that if he's expected to act on saving the Amazon, which is described as the lungs of planet Earth, which produces almost about 20% of the oxygen that the people on this planet in fact consume, then he said that the richer nations also need to pay for the fact that the Amazon rainforest is not cut down in his own nation. This is a very specific demand that the Brazilian president, someone who's been described as the Trump of the tropics, he's put forth. It remains to be seen as to how all of this will, of course, be sorted out. And the gentleman you're looking at on your screen is Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish president. He is also being welcomed. There are other high-profile leaders who have also made their way to the venue of the G20 summit. And this is what is unfolding. So we expect these leaders to interact, and after that, there will be some press briefings as well. We'll continue to get you all the updates that are unfolding in Rome. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.